The first sound was not the siren, not the scrape of a cruiser on asphalt, not even the sharp voices that followed. It was the slap, a flat crack against skin, echoing off brick and glass, loud enough to make the crowd on Maple Street stumble back into silence. Derek Lawson's head snapped sideways under the strike. The coffee in his hand lurched upward, the paper cup crushed against his fingers, scalding liquid spilling down the gray hoodie he wore every Friday. Dark stains spread across his chest, dripping like fresh paint onto the sidewalk. Two officers surged forward with the momentum of men who had already decided the outcome. They shoved Derek hard against the hood of their car, his palms flattened on hot steel, the kind of warmth engines hold long after the key is turned. Passers-by gasped. Phones shot upward, and in an instant the quiet corner bodega, the waiting bus, the teens with scooters, all of them became witnesses to a scene that history had rehearsed too many times. Only this time, the man pinned against the car was not just another target of suspicion. He was Derek Lawson, Deputy Commissioner for Standards and Accountability at the Rivergate Police Department, the very man who read complaints, audited body cams, and decided which incidents ended in retraining and which ended in pink slips. But none of that mattered here, not yet. On this block, at this moment, he was only a black man in a hoodie, and that was all the officers chose to see. A walk meant to stay ordinary. Friday mornings were ritual. Derek never wore the suit. He set aside the polished shoes and silk tie that fit conference rooms and press briefings. Instead, he pulled on a gray hoodie softened by years of wash cycles, laced up cracked leather shoes that remembered more sidewalks than carpets, and walked. No driver, no entourage, just him, a cup of coffee, and the city. It wasn't performance. It was survival. Policy, he believed, sounded different when you carried it across streets instead of drafting it behind glass. The best lessons didn't arrive in memos. They lived in the breath of bus stops, in the voices of store clerks, in the silence of neighborhoods too tired to complain. Rivergate was alive in its own stubborn way. Newspapers hit doorsteps with a thump. A city bus hissed and bent low for a woman clutching a tote bag. A jogger passed, already plotting the day's lunch. Derek's path led down Maple toward Rosa's corner store. Rosa Alvarez had been running her bodega for longer than most precinct captains had worn a badge. The city forgot shops like hers until storms knocked the grid out and suddenly batteries, candles, and neighbors mattered more than supermarkets. Inside, Rosa moved like a conductor, every gesture precise. She knew who preferred which bread, who needed credit until Friday, who always forgot to ask for napkins. Derek was greeted the same way every time. "Morning, Mr. Lawson. Still on that no-sugar kick? Trying to live long enough to be annoying?" he teased back. He asked about her grandson's scholarship essays, the boy bright enough to turn broken fans and cereal boxes into robots. She poured his coffee with the care of a surgeon, slid a banana into the bag when she thought he wasn't looking. The store smelled of warm bread, magazine ink, and citrus that clung faintly to clothes. Teenagers argued about which sports drink tasted less like regret. A man in a reflective vest scratched a lottery ticket on his thigh. Ordinary moments stacked into the kind of truth spreadsheets could never measure, even on Maple Street, where sidewalks remembered too much pain. 5 unguarded minutes could feel like belonging. "A boy in a telescope, Mr. Lawson." The voice tugged at his elbow. Jamal, backpack slung low, hair picked high with the certainty of 14. Always seen with a scooter and a question. Today, the boy held 2 magazines, one a glossy science monthly with a telescope on the cover, the other all explosions and fonts that shouted promises it couldn't keep. "Which one's better?" Jamal asked. Derek pointed his chin toward the telescope. "That one teaches you how to change your mind. The other just tells you what to think." The boy grinned like he'd been let in on a secret. When he thought Derek wasn't looking, he tilted his phone low. A selfie, not staged, just a moment. "Kids," Derek mused, "archive the world because adults keep losing it." He didn't mind. Let the boy keep the record. Someone should. Echoes of the past back outside. Sunlight pooled against storefronts, balanced on the edges of parked cars. A delivery truck quarreled with a loading zone. Derek inhaled deeply, the kind of breath that reminded him the city didn't owe permission slips for existence. But memory was never far. At 19, he'd been slammed onto a hood, much like this one, not for what he'd done, but for who he was. His mother stood on the porch still holding a dish towel. His father, older and tired, kept repeating "sir" to an officer barely 3 months older than Derek. The cuffs had clicked tight, then loose, without apology. That scar became his compass. If the safest place to tell the truth was inside a system that thought it owned the truth, then he would climb inside that system and stay there until he changed it. From the bones outward, Deputy Commissioner Lawson was born that day. But on this morning, in his hoodie and cracked shoes, he was still that boy, remembering the sting of cold metal. And as sirens curved closer, the scar remembered too. The sirens bend, the street sirens stitched themselves into the air, first faint, then nearer, until they bent around the corner, like a needle pulling threat through fabric. Shoulders tightened across the block. The bus driver's foot tapped the brake harder than necessary. Even the teenagers went still. Derek's instincts, sharpened by decades in uniform and out, Fired quietly. Was there a dispatch call for this block? A bolo? He scanned the sidewalk. Ordinary people, ordinary lives. Nothing that justified sirens cutting a straight line toward Maple. Jamal's voice dropped lower than his age. You good, Mr. Lawson? Derek smiled so the boy didn't have to carry the fear for both of them. Always good until I'm not. If you've never felt a city hold its breath, you might miss it. The traffic light changed, but no car moved. Rose's bell jangled, though no one had touched the door. Even a dog down the block chose silence. Derek had lived long enough to recognize the weight of a moment arriving before it revealed its face. And then the cruiser swung into view. The confrontation it hit the curb hard, tires kissing concrete sharp enough to rattle pigeons into the air. Doors flung open, and two officers spilled out with rehearsed aggression. The first was Cole Maddox, shoulders broad, jaw set like a gavel. The second, younger, followed half a beat behind, reading Cole's body like it was scripture. Ryan Keller, cap brim, still stiff with newness, nerves twitching at the edge of every movement. Hands where I can see them, Cole barked. Derek's hands were already visible, one wrapped loosely around a paper cup, the other open at his side. He lifted them, a fraction, not surrender, just clarity. What's going on, officer? His voice was steady, neither meek nor sharp, balanced like a man who had been asked this question too many times before. You match a description. Cole's eyes scanned Derek's chest like his heartbeat was contraband. What description is that? Derek asked evenly. Cole's mouth twitched into something that wanted to be a smile but wasn't. I just gave it. Black male, gray hoodie. The words carried the weight of accusation disguised as fact. 100 responses rose in Derek's chest, but he chose the one with the most air in it. And how tall? What shoes? What direction of travel? The slap landed like punctuation. A swift, practiced strike, palm to cheek, wrist snapping clean. Derek's head jerked with the blow. Coffee spilled, a hot ribbon painting his hoodie in dark streaks. Someone gasped. Someone else said, hey, in a voice that wasn't ready for courage. Cole's other hand shot forward, wrenching the cup from Derek's grip. He crushed it, flung the remains at Derek's chest. Coffee splattered down his collar, soaking into seams. Hands where I can see them, Cole repeated. But his tone meant something else. I decide the weather. Phones lifted higher. Jamal's camera trembled, then steadied like courage, catching its balance. Rose's voice rang out sharp from the bodega doorway. He shops here every week. Don't you dare. Cole's shove slammed Derek against the hood. Metal heat bled into his palms. His stance spread wide, fingers flat, so there could be no argument later. Stop resisting, Cole growled. I'm not resisting, Derek said calmly into the steel. The crowd knew it. The camera saw it. Still, the cuffs came out, metal teeth biting, ratcheting click by click into place. Every phone caught the sound. Every witness felt the verdict it implied. The weight of witnesses' neighbors froze in doorways. A man on a ladder leaned down, hammer forgotten in his hand. Teenagers gripped their scooters like spears. The bus driver killed the engine. Silence of heavy machinery underscoring the wrongness of it all. Rosa's voice cracked the stillness. You don't have the right to do this. Her phone was steady, her jaw locked. Put it down, lady, Cole snapped. Unless you want to join him. Rosa didn't flinch. Do it, she shot back. So the whole world can see what you are. Beside her, Jamal whispered, I'll livestream it. The whole city will know. His fingers shook, but his voice carried defiance. Derek's cheek pressed against warm metal. Sweat mixed with cooling coffee. In that moment, humiliation dragged him backward to every injustice he'd endured. But instead of breaking him, it steadied him. His voice came clear, loud enough for every microphone. You're making a serious mistake. Cole smirked, contempt dripping like venom. The only mistake here is thinking you matter. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A mother covered her child's ears. The teenagers' eyes widened, anger sparking in their faces. Phones zoomed tighter, the air heavy with something irreversible. Cole yanked the chain of the cuffs unnecessarily hard. Stop moving, he barked. I'm not moving, Derek replied, voice calm but cutting. And the cameras will prove it. And they would. The cruiser door slammed with a hollow thud, sealing Derek Lawson into the stale air of the back seat. Vinyl cracked beneath him, the cuffs digging into his wrists. His shoulders pulled tight against the partition that turned every officer's face into a blur. Coffee cooled sticky against his hoodie, the smell of bitterness filling the car as it lurched from the curb. Cole Maddox gripped the wheel like it owed him money. His jaw flexed, his eyes fixed ahead, the anger in him too large for the uniform he wore. Next to him, Ryan Keller sat stiff in the passenger seat, hands pressed flat against his thighs as though he could hold his nerves still. The city blurred past, storefronts flashing in jerks of acceleration. Stop signs ignored. Pedestrians pressed back onto curbs as the cruiser carved its way forward. The block they left behind didn't quiet. Phones still pointed skyward. Rosa's voice still echoed. Jamal's livestream still ticked upward. The truth had already left with them. Following the car in every digital vein of the city. Inside, silence thickened. Only the hum of the engine and the hiss of tires filled the space. Cole's script will write it clean, Cole muttered, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. Resisting, aggressive stance. Suspicious movements, That's the report. Ryan swallowed hard, throat dry. Yeah. The word cracked, more question than answer. Cole's eyes snapped sideways. You hear me? You sign it. Witness line. Simple. We've done this before. Ryan nodded too quickly. He had signed reports like this, too many times, his pen turning half-truths into official record. Each signature had felt smaller than the last, as if the ink was wearing him down grain by grain. Derek sat chained in the back, still as stone. No panic, no protest. Just silence that rattled louder than any shout. His gaze slid to the scratched rectangle of glass in the partition, meeting Ryan's reflection in the rearview mirror. Unblinking, unreadable. Ryan's chest tightened. It was one thing to sign off on a lie when the target disappeared into anonymity. It was another to have that target watching him, with eyes that carried weight, eyes that seemed to know him better than he wanted to be known. A name spoken softly, Officer Keller. Derek's voice came soft, steady. Ryan flinched. He hadn't expected him to speak, and he sure hadn't expected his name. Your body cam, Derek continued. It's been time-stamped wrong for weeks. Fix it before someone else notices. Ryan's head snapped toward the mirror. His pulse skipped. No one knew about that. He hadn't told Cole. He hadn't told Morale. He'd planned to ignore it until the error buried itself beneath the noise of 100 other mistakes. But Derek knew. How Ryan started, then stopped. Cole slammed a palm against the wheel. Don't talk to him. He's a suspect, not your friend. But Derek only leaned back against the seat. Cuffs tight, posture calm. You think a few lines on a report will bury this? The world doesn't live in paperwork, gentlemen. It lives in people. In cameras, in voices you ignored. The words hung heavy in the stale air, pressing into Ryan's chest. He wanted to believe Cole's script, wanted to believe in clean reports, in procedures that kept the machine running. But Derek's gaze in the mirror made belief feel like a lie. A shadow in the mirror headlights appeared in the side mirror. Steady, close, not aggressive, but not letting go. Morales. Sergeant Alina Morales followed at a perfect distance, her cruiser trailing with a patience that said she had no intention of letting Cole own this ride. She didn't crowd. She didn't drift. She simply stayed an anchor in the darkening street. Cole saw her too. His jaw tightened. Of course she's back there, he muttered, shadowing like she's the saint of Rivergate. Ryan didn't answer. He couldn't. The sight of Morales trailing steady felt like both a lifeline and a weight. She had a reputation for honesty that made men like Cole grit their teeth. And Derek, still cuffed, still silent, tilted his head just enough to catch Morales' headlights in his peripheral vision. For the first time since the slap, his lips curved not into a smile exactly, but into something close to recognition. The game had shifted, even if Cole hadn't realized it yet. Pression points. Cole leaned closer to Ryan, his words a hiss. He's no one, just another mouth running. Don't let him crawl into your head. You back me up. That's how this works. Ryan tried to nod, tried to believe it, but the reflection in the mirror broke him. Derek's calm wasn't defiance, it was endurance. The kind of silence built by a man who had already survived this more times than he could count. The cuffs on his wrists hadn't humbled him. They hadn't even dented him. He sat like he was waiting for something else, something larger, as though the officers in front weren't in control of the story at all. The thought chilled Ryan more than Cole's threats ever had. The weight of silence. The cruiser cut through the streets, past storefronts and traffic lights. The city flickered across Derek's face in bars of neon and sodium glow. His expression didn't change. Every flash of light carved the calm deeper into his features, a reminder that dignity could survive even this. Ryan's fingers fidgeted against his lap. He wanted to reach for his body cam, wanted to check if it was recording, wanted to erase the lie before it even existed. Instead, he sat still, suffocating beneath the weight of his own silence. Cole pressed harder on the gas, the engine growling, but the ride wasn't just forward, it was downward, into something Ryan didn't want to name. Behind them, Morales' headlights stayed fixed, not chasing, not retreating, just there, watching, guarding. And in the back seat, Derek Lawson sat cuffed and calm, the truth waiting in his stillness like a storm biding its time. The precinct smelled like stale coffee and tired paper, the kind of smell that clung to walls long after officers had gone home, lingering with the ghosts of reports written in haste and decisions no one wanted to defend. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering faintly. Plastic chairs sagged against the walls in postures of defeat. A bulletin board displayed faded flyers, missing pets. Neighborhood watch meetings, a CPR refresher course postponed 3 times. It was the sort of place where procedure wore thin at the elbows, where duty was measured in paperwork, not people. Cole Maddox shoved Derek through the door like a man delivering evidence, not a human being. Ryan Keller trailed behind, his gaze fixed on the floor tiles, as though each square might crack under his weight. Alina Morales followed last, her uniform still sharp, her eyes steady. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone was enough to remind the room that something larger than Cole's ego was now in play. The desk of forgetfulness. Lieutenant Frank Duran emerged from a side office, tugging at a tie that had surrendered years ago. His hair was gray where it wasn't thinning, his eyes set in the tired squint of a man who believed more in forms than in people. What's the charge? Duran asked, his voice flat, already loaded with boredom. Cole straightened, puffing his chest like a schoolboy reciting memorized lines. Resisting? Interference? Suspicious activity? Aggressive posture during lawful stop. The words rattled off like a catechism, rehearsed so many times they no longer carried meaning. Duran nodded mechanically. "Book him," he said, already turning back toward his office, as if the matter were settled. The crowd from Maple couldn't follow into the precinct, but their presence lingered in the air like static. The weight of phones, of cameras, of Rosa's voice shouting from the doorway, it all pressed in. Even within these tired walls, Morales didn't move. She stood a few paces behind Cole, arms crossed, her gaze sharp enough to cut through paper. She knew this was no ordinary booking. She had seen the badge case. She had felt the moment when the street turned, when witnesses stopped being passive and became historians. The case on the floor. Cole pushed Derek toward the intake desk, one heavy hand on his shoulder. He wanted to humiliate, to stamp dominance in front of every clerk and officer who happened to glance up. "Hands behind your back," he barked again, though the cuffs were already tight. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," Derek said, calm as stone. His voice was even, unflinching. He knew who was listening. The body cams, the security cameras mounted on the ceiling, the clerks pretending not to watch. The record mattered more than his pride. Ryan hovered nearby, his freckled face pale, his jaw clenched. He couldn't shake the image of Derek's calm eyes in the mirror, or the way his voice had spoken his name in the cruiser. He wanted to speak now, wanted to tell Duran that this was wrong, that none of it fit, but his throat closed. Fear sat heavy on his chest. "Search," Cole ordered. His voice carried the authority of a man who mistook volume for truth. Ryan obeyed, his hands moving like they didn't belong to him. He patted Derek down roughly. Not careful, not curious, just ownership performed with fingers. From the inside pocket of the gray hoodie, he pulled a small leather case. It was worn at the edges, the kind of wear that comes from years of use, not neglect. Ryan held it in his palm, the weight of it sparking a question in his face. He glanced at Cole, then back at Derek. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered. Then he dropped it. The case hit the floor with a dull thud that seemed louder than it should have been. In the silence of the intake room, it rang like a bell, reverberating in every rib. "That's mine," Derek said quietly, his cheek pressed against warm steel. Cole's hand pressed harder on the back of his neck, grinding him into the desk as if to leave a print. "You don't talk," he sneered. "You listen." But the case on the floor refused silence. Its presence alone unsettled the room. The moment Morales moved, Morales bent at the waist, her movements deliberate. She picked up the case as though handling something alive. Her eyes flicked to Derek's, asking without asking. He gave the slightest nod. She unzipped it. The badge inside caught the fluorescent light and flung it back at the room. Not just a shield, but a statement carved in metal and authority. "Deputy Commissioner Derek Lawson." Morales's jaw ticked. She was not a woman, easily surprised, but recognition cracked her composure. She snapped the case shut, holding it like a fuse. Lieutenant Duran, halfway into his office again, stopped mid. "What is that?" His voice thinned. Morales walked forward, placing the badge into his palm with the same gravity one might hand over a verdict. He unzipped the case again, as if hoping the letters would rearrange themselves. They didn't. He read the name twice, then once more. Color drained from his face like rain washing chalk from pavement. His smirk, his casual disinterest both gone. "This is Deputy Commissioner Lawson," Duran stammered, voice suddenly a size too small. Then louder, struggling for command. "Uncuff him, now." The shift in gravity, the intake room froze. A clerk's pen halted mid. Civilians on the bench leaned forward, as if tugged by invisible string. Even the hum of the HVAC seemed to hush. Ryan's hand shook as he fumbled with the key. The cuffs clicked open with a sound like disbelief learning to speak. He stepped back, guilt settling on him like a heavy coat. Cole didn't move. His jaw tightened, his face pinched brittle. "You're joking," he spat. His voice wavered between disbelief and fury. Duran's gaze stayed locked on Derek, the way a man studies a painting he thought was fake until the curator tells him otherwise. "Deputy Commissioner Lawson," he said, layering respect onto every syllable. "Had I known you didn't?" Derek cut in, his voice calm, steady, but sharp enough to slice through Duran's excuse. He rubbed his wrists once, not theatrical, just human. "And that's the point." Morales speaks. Cole surged forward, desperate to reassert control. He was an hostile tone, refused commands. Morales's voice cut through his bluster like a blade. "I was on scene, Lieutenant. There was no probable cause articulated. Force was used before any lawful basis was established." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The clarity in her words filled the room. Cole glared at her, but Morales didn't flinch. Her hand hovered near her radio. Steady, ready. Duran cleared his throat, the sound of bureaucracy rearranging itself. "Officer Maddox, Officer Keller, secure your body cams and dash footage immediately. Sergeant Morales will take custody." Ryan's Adam's apple bobbed hard, relief mixed with shame. He nodded, his voice barely audible. "Yes, sir." Cole's eyes flicked between Derek and Morales, his fury brittle, his smirk breaking. "This is political," he growled under his breath. "No," Derek replied. His voice carried the weight of stone. "It's procedural. And overdue." The room changers. The geometry of the intake room shifted. The man in the hoodie was no longer just a suspect. He was the man who signed evaluations, who decided promotions, who terminated careers. The officers felt it in their posture. The clerks felt it in the silence. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum at a different pitch. Duran grasped for footing. "Per policy, we'll move to an interview room. Deputy Commissioner, sir, we'll take statements." But Derek's eyes weren't on the interview rooms. They drifted to the evidence bins, the upload station, the clock on the wall that had been 3 minutes fast for a month. His gaze carried weight, and the room bent under it. "You'll get the truth," he said quietly. "Start with securing the record." Morales nodded once. Already moving, she tucked the badge back into her vest pocket, not as a trophy, but as a boundary. "This happened, and we will not pretend otherwise." Ryan stared at his hands, unable to look up. Shame burned in his chest, but beneath it something else began to stir, a need for honesty. He wasn't sure he had the strength to voice yet. Cole stood rigid, fists tight, eyes darting like a man searching for solid ground that no longer existed. And Derek Lawson, no longer pressed to the hood, no longer shackled by cuffs, stood in the center of the room with quiet authority, the kind that did not need to shout. A fault line. The door to interview room 3 swung open, the hinge sighing like it had watched this play too many times. Inside waited a table, a camera, 4 chairs, and the reckoning that could no longer be delayed. The precinct wasn't the same anymore. Authority had shifted, the balance of power tilted, and though Cole still wore his badge, every witness in the room knew something irreversible had already begun. The truth was no longer waiting outside on Maple Street. It was here, inside these tired walls, and it was about to speak with a voice louder than any report could silence. By nightfall, the municipal auditorium looked like a storm had decided to sit down and stay a while. News vans lined the curb with their masts raised like bare trees. Camera lights pulsed against brick. Voices swelled and broke at the doors, pooling in the entryway and rolling back toward the street. The steps were crowded, reporters with microphones, neighbors shouldering winter coats against an autumn that arrived early, students craning to see, elders with folded hands and expressions that said they had not waited all these years to blink now. Inside, the hearing room had been assembled in a rush but held the weight of ceremony anyway. 3 chairs for the panel faced the chamber name placards fresh from a printer that still smelled like warm plastic. A projector hummed, impatient for its turn to speak. The clock on the back wall clicked audibly, louder than clocks ought to, like it had decided to testify too. Rosa Alvarez stood near the front, chin lifted, phone steadied in her right hand as if her arm had become a tripod sometime around noon, and simply never stopped. Jamal hovered just to her left, eyes wide and bright. His livestream counter climbed in a steady vertical river. He didn't look at the number anymore. He didn't need to. Rivergate was watching. So were people who had never been to Rivergate, but knew its story by a different name on a different street. Officers lined the back wall in uniform rows, hands folded, faces fixed, their presence a map of the department's nerves. City attorneys shuffled paper. A few community leaders sat quietly in the first row, their stillness a kind of ballast. The murmured music of a waiting room played whisper. Cough, chair, scrape, zipper, whisper again. Derek Lawson entered without fanfare. No suit. The gray hoodie had been cleaned as best as a person can clean, what the day insists on keeping. A faint blot of coffee remained at the collar, a stubborn fact. He took his place at a table facing the panel, wrists unbound now, the red marks still faintly visible. He folded his hands. He waited. Sergeant Alina Morales settled 2 seats away, posture straight, gaze calm, a sentinel who had arranged her courage in neat stacks. Ryan Keller slipped through a side door, smaller than his uniform. The brim of his cap finally softened, the newness dented. He tried the back wall, then a chair near the aisle, then sat somewhere between, as if indecision could be furniture. Cole Maddox came in behind a lawyer, who wore a tie like a shield and a face that called everything theater. Cole didn't look at Derek. He looked at the crowd, then the panel, then the cameras. His jaw worked through a silent sentence he hadn't yet found the words for. If he hoped to discover authority in the room did not offer it to him. The panel chair, City Attorney Rowan Hale, tapped her gavel once. The sound was measured, not dramatic. Her voice carried the practiced fatigue of someone who knew sleep would not fix what she needed to fix. "This is an emergency disciplinary hearing concerning conduct at Maple and 3rd this morning," she said. "We will review all available footage and hear statements as needed. We ask for quiet. The record matters." She nodded to an AV tech at a cart. His fingers hovered over the keyboard like a pianist. Finding middle C, the lights dipped. The projector's fan rose a tone. The screen at the panel's back whispered to life. The street returned. First, the approach. The cruiser angling hard at the curb, nose down, tire scuffed bright in the speakers. Doors snapping open. Cole's frame, entering the image with that certainty cameras always make look worse. Derek in a gray hoodie, coffee in hand. palms visible, shoulders squared. The room collectively leaned forward, though the chairs did not move. Pause, Rowan said once, not to interrupt but to name the moment for the record. The frame froze with coffee still in Derek's hand, palms open to the air, face calm. Resume. The slap landed with that same crisp, sick sound the microphones could not ignore. It was the sort of noise people claim later not to have heard, even though their bodies flinch when memory plays it back. Someone hissed. Someone's chair squeaked in a way that sounded like a wince. Then the shove, practiced, precise. Derek spun, planted against the hood, fingers spread wide on hot steel. Every inch of posture an argument for the truth. Stop resisting, the audio insisted. A stamp pressed again and again onto an envelope that didn't fit it. The body cam angle swung mid-frame to Rosa in the bodega door, her phone as steady as a scope. They played the 5 seconds when her mouth formed the sentence. Half the city could say word for word by now. He's a customer. Every week. Another angle found Jamala's camera hand jittering for 2 seconds, then setting. The image smoothing his bravery found its sea legs. The footage cut to the intake hallway. Derek moving past the desk. Morales behind him, Cole's jaw, a rope pulled too tight. The intake room next. The small leather case in Durant's hand. The paleness that crept into his face like the fluorescent light had chosen a single target. The audio picked up the first time the title found the air. Deputy Commissioner Lawson. The word deputy did something to the room's temperature. It always does. The screen faded to black. The projector's fan kept spinning like a witness ready to swear on a second stack of evidence. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense. Like fog you can't see through but can feel gather on your skin. Rowan let it sit a heartbeat farther than comfort allows. Truth needs time to land. Then she said, "We'll hear statements." Cole's lawyer rose first, smoothing his tie as if ironing could correct the day. "Let the record reflect," he began, that Officer Maddox faced a rapidly evolving situation with a non-compliant individual matching an active suspect description. Officer Safety Rowan raised a hand without raising her voice. "We just watched the video. Counselor, your client will have a chance to speak." Cole leaned toward the fixed microphone with the energy of a man who believes volume can revise a past already recorded. If he had complied, he said, none of this would have happened. A wave of small sounds moved through the seats. A breath pulled sharp. A whisper exchanged. A humorless laugh from someone who had run out of patience. Rosa's single bark of disbelief struck the air and vanished. Jamal's camera found Cole's face and held it, generous and merciless. Each in turn. Derek angled toward his own microphone, not to match force, but to cut cleanly through it. "I complied," he said, each word separated enough to be counted. "I spoke. I stood still. I offered identification. None of that is a crime." The ordinary language hit like a gavel. In rooms like this, truth often sounds banal, until it arrives exactly where it must. Rowan turned to Morales. "Sergeant." Morales did not arrange papers. She did not clear her throat. "I arrived after initial contact," she said. "I observed no articulable probable cause for a stop or detention. Force was used before any lawful basis was established. I secured a badge case from Mr. Lawson's person, confirmed his identity, and ordered that he be He chose to keep the cuffs on so the record would be complete." That last sentence traveled the room like a measurement. A few heads dipped, others lifted. The panel's pen tips paused and then resumed. Cole's lawyer leaned toward his client, whispering. Cole's jaw set harder, an attempt at resolve that looked, under these lights, like brittle glass. Rowan shifted her gaze. "Officer Keller." Ryan Keller approached the microphone in tiny increments, retreating, leaning again like a swimmer testing cold water with his chest. He gripped the sides of the lectern. His voice, when it found him, belonged to a man older than the one wearing his uniform. "I retrieved a case from Mr. Lawson's pocket," he said, looking at the wood instead of faces. "I should have opened it. I didn't. I dropped it." He swallowed. "I was going to sign the witness line on Officer Maddox's report." He stopped there, as if the rest of the sentence had to climb a hill to reach daylight. The room waited with him, not kindly, but not cruelly either, just the way a city waits to see if someone will do the simple hard thing. "The footage," he said at last. "What I saw," he wasn't resisting. Ryan looked up at Derek for the first time in the room, then down again, as if direct gaze might scorch. "I'm sorry," he added, barely audible. "I was wrong." The chamber didn't applaud. It didn't gasp. It did something sturdier. It believed him, because the shape of his confession fit the shape of what the city had watched all day. Contrition is not proof, but it can be a path. And the room recognized a foot on it. Cole spoke into his mic without waiting to be invited. "This is a setup," he said, tossing the word toward the panel like bait. "Politics? He baited us. He wanted this." Rowan's eyes cooled by degrees. "Officer Maddox, consider your next words carefully." Derek did not look at Cole when he spoke. He looked at the panel, at the city that had become a kind of jury, and at the clock that clicked as though it were the metronome of a longer history. "I wanted the truth," he said, "and for once, I wanted it to outlive the sidewalk." The AV tech glanced at Rowan. She nodded. He cued a short montage, the split-screen view of body cams with timestamps side by side, the dash cam angle widening context. An interior shot where integral microphones captured Durant's first reaction to the badge. In one small frame, you could see Ryan's fingers hover over the witness line and then lift away. Nothing dramatic, just hesitation with the volume turned up by scrutiny. When the screen went dark again, the projector fan's long exhale sounded like a tired machine grateful to stop working for a minute. The audience didn't move. The quiet had acquired a shape. Rohan folded her hands. "We will now hear from 2 civilian witnesses," she said. "Ms. Alvarez, then Mr. Jamal Thompson." Rosa walked to the mic. Her blouse sleeves were rolled to the elbow like a woman about to scrub a stubborn stain from a dish that did not belong to her, but for which she felt responsible. She did not script her voice. She didn't need to. "He is in my store every week," she began. "Coffee, no sugar. He asks about my grandson. He remembers small things, the kind of things good people remember." She turned slightly, enough that her words faced and not accused, just faced Coley. He stood. He held his hands out. He showed them his palms and his face. "The slap?" She stopped. When she began again, she chose sturdy words. "The slap was not about safety. It was about disrespect. And I have lived long enough to know the difference." She let the line rest and stepped back. The room had nothing to add. Truth does not always need a flourish. Sometimes it asks only for a place to sit down. Jamal approached next. 2 inches taller than his courage, but close enough that the gap could be crossed with a breath. He didn't bring his phone to the mic. It kept working where it was, lens open on the day. "I filmed because adults always say they didn't see what happened," he said, looking straight at the panel in the way only 14 can. Brazen, honest, unpolished. "I was scared. My hands shook. But when I saw his badge in the station on the video, I thought about how many times there isn't a badge. There's just a person, and nobody believes them." He swallowed, stepped back. The panel did not smile. They wrote. Rohan exhaled a breath she might have been holding since late morning. She looked at the council tables, then at the audience, then at the officers standing along the back. "We will reassess for 20 minutes and return with interim decisions," she said. But before the gavel fell, Derek leaned toward his mic, not to interrupt, but to add one last detail to the record while the room still had both eyes open. "Madame Chair," he said, "whether I wore a badge or not today, what happened on Maple would still have been wrong. The difference is only that this time, the truth had an easier way to travel. Don't let that fact make you merciful where you ought to be precise." Rowan gave a single small nod that contained neither agreement nor refusal, only recognition that the words had been spoken into the proper book. The gavel tapped. The room rose and sat and rose again. In that peculiar shuffle of recess, reporters flared outward toward the doors like sparks. Attorneys conferred with their clients in huddles meant to appear calm. Neighbors turned to one another and spoke in voices that forgot their own volume. In the aisle, Rosa touched Derek's shoulder without dramatics, just the human gesture that says, "We kept the camera steady." Jamal hovered beside her, the live counter still marching, his face wearing a surprise he couldn't hide, that the world had listened to a single boy's hands. In the back, a few uniformed officers stared at the floor. One scribbled something in a notebook, thick with notes that had never mattered until tonight. Another shifted his weight toward the exit and then back again, like he had suddenly remembered how complicated doors can be. Cole's lawyer spoke close to his ear. Cole's expression did not rearrange. His eyes tracked Derek across the room with the kind of focus men use when they are trying to find, in another man, the thing that ruined them. Ryan sat 2 chairs away from his original seat, as if he could physically distance himself from the version of himself who had walked in. He looked at his hands. He looked at Morale. He looked at Derek and then away, the way a person looks at sun on water, drawn, pained, certain the brightness is the point. Morales stood near the aisle, one palm on the back of a chair, posture easy, attention forward. She didn't speak to reporters, didn't sidle toward the panel, didn't confer with counsel. She watched the room the way you watch a bridge that is holding for now but ought to be rebuilt. When Derek passed, she met his eyes. She didn't say "I'm sorry." She didn't need to. Respect has its own vocabulary. Beyond the closed doors, the city pressed up against its own glass faces turned toward the light, microphones sprouting like reeds, questions waiting to be asked and asked again until the answers stopped trying to wriggle away. A squad car idled at the curb with its engine off, as if even the machines had decided to be quiet. The projector's fan spun down at last, a tired hush. The clock on the wall clicked the seconds into a deeper ledger. The panel did not return immediately. They let the room live with itself a little longer than the margins of the crowd. A nurse, still in scrubs, told a stranger a story about an officer who had once talked a patient down with gentle words, when cuffs might have been easy. "Those moments exist," she said, and the stranger nodded because hope is a kind of evidence. 2. If you care about what it can build. A man on a ladder who had watched the morning from a rung higher than the rest of the block stood near the end of a row, hammer still clipped to his belt, staring at nothing, which is to say staring at everything. Rosa checked her battery, swapped to a power pack, and kept the lens level. Jamal finally sat, the adrenaline deciding to leave his body all at once, and put his head in his hands for a count of 10 before lifting it again. He tapped the comments once, smiled at something, frowned at something else, then remembered not to look and set the phone back in its dock. Witness first. Temptations later. Derek remained at his table, not pacing, not performing. The way a man sits when he has chosen the place where he will be found. He watched the door where the panel had disappeared. He looked at the empty screen, which somehow still contained pictures. He breathed in a measured 4 and out a measured 4. A habit learned in rooms where men confuse power with noise. Colt, for the first time since Maple, looked unsure of what to do with his hands. He put them on the table, then in his lap, then crossed his arms, then uncrossed them. He was not a small man. Tonight the room had found a way to make him smaller without touching him at all. The gavel returned before the crowd was ready for it. But readiness and justice attend different clocks. Rowan Hale resumed her seat. The other panelists followed. The lights adjusted themselves into the exact same brightness they had offered before, which is one of the ways institutions tell you they are still in charge. Rowan let the room settle to a quiet and folded her notes, the way people fold maps when they know the route without looking. "We will deliver interim findings shortly," she said. "Additional review will continue. The primary facts are not in dispute." She didn't ask anyone to stand. She didn't ask anyone to pray. She didn't appeal to notions of family, or service, or weather. She looked out at a room that had held its breath all day, and if her voice softened a degree, it was not sentiment. It was precision agreeing to speak in public. The clock clicked. A chair groaned somewhere. Rosa steadied her phone. Jamal held his own breath for luck. He didn't believe in. Cole kept his jaw still by force. Ryan's hands opened on his knees as if ready to receive whatever the next minute placed there. Morales' eyes stayed level. Derek's posture didn't lift or drop. Rowan glanced once at the blank screen that had shown the city itself back to itself. Then she began, and the city listened. The panel would recess and return with decisions. The rest was a matter of record, waiting to be read aloud. The panel returned with faces carved into stone. The audience stilled, phones raised but silent. The hum of recorders, a quiet insect chorus. Rowan Hale adjusted her glasses, glanced once at her notes, and then looked outward at the room that had carried the story since morning. After review of all evidence and testimony, she began. "This panel delivers the following findings." Her voice did not climb or soften. It walked forward, steady as law. The first name landed like thunder. Officer Cole Maddox terminated, effective immediately. The words cracked across the chamber, louder than the gavel had been. "Your record will be forwarded to the State Post Commission for decertification. You will not wear this badge again." The air shifted. Relief broke through anger like a dam. Some faces relaxed, others tensed harder, but everyone felt the weight of a verdict that sounded final in a way Rivergate was not used to hearing. Cole's lawyer touched his arm, whispering a consolation shaped like procedure. Cole jerked it away. His face flushed, jaw locked, eyes burning into Derek with fury unshielded. For the first time since the slap, his silence outweighed his bluster. Rowan turned a page. Officer Ryan Keller suspended without pay. Mandatory retraining. Probationary oversight. Retention contingent on demonstrable change under mentorship. This is not leniency. This is the last chance this department will grant you. Ryan nodded quickly, eyes glassy. Shame bent his shoulders. But in the bend there was also relief. The kind that comes when punishment doubles as reprieve. He whispered "thank you," so soft the microphone barely caught it, but Derek heard. Then Rowan looked to the side table where Lieutenant Frank Duran sat, rigid in his chair. Lieutenant Frank Duran demoted to sergeant for repeated failures of oversight and dismissal of prior warnings concerning Officer Maddox. Effective immediately. Duran's mouth opened, then shut again. The demotion struck harder than any outburst could have. Years of climbing collapsed in a sentence. He looked at his hands, unwilling to meet a single gaze. Rowan closed her folder. "This concludes our findings." But Derek wasn't finished. He leaned into his microphone, voice calm, deliberate, but edged with steel. "Precinct 4 will undergo a full audit body cam compliance. Stop data, complaint resolution time, effective tonight. Every unit will operate under one principle. Every public contact is assumed to be transparent. Because it will be." The words rippled through the room. Heavy stones tossed into still water. Officers shifted uneasily. Reporters scribbled furiously. Community leaders straightened. Derek's tone didn't waver. "I don't need apologies. I need accuracy. I don't need promises. I need the record to match reality. This department belongs to the people of Rivergate, not the fear of its officers." It wasn't thunderous. It wasn't fiery. It was clear, and clarity has a way of sounding final. For Rosa, seated near the aisle, it was vindication. For Jamal, still live streaming, it was a lesson carved deep. For Ryan, it was both indictment and lifeline. For Cole, it was the end of a career built on arrogance. And for everyone else inside the room and out in the streets pressed against the doors, it was proof that truth had finally walked into daylight, and this time it wasn't leaving quietly. 3 days later, the auditorium at Rivergate High School overflowed. Folding chairs creaked beneath the weight of neighbors, parents, students, and elders who had carried the story in their mouths all week. The air was thick with expectation, the kind that makes walls feel smaller and ceilings lower. On the stage sat a wooden podium that looked too small for the size of the truth it would soon carry. Behind it, a projector screen glowed, waiting. The first speaker was Jamal. His hands trembled as he plugged his phone into the projector, but his voice held steady. He was 14, but tonight he carried himself like someone older, someone who had been drafted into history without warning. The screen lit up with his shaky footage, the slap, the spill of coffee, the command "stop resisting" echoing in tinny audio. The crowd watched in silence, many seeing it for the 100th time, but feeling it new because it was their neighbor's phone, their neighbor's truth. When the video ended, the room stayed silent, a beat too long, then erupted in applause. Not applause for what had happened, but for a boy who had refused to look away. Jamal sat down, cheeks red, chin lifted, as though the sound itself had aged him into someone stronger. A nurse named Angela followed. Her scrubs were still flecked with the fatigue of a night shift, but her voice carried strength. She spoke of a time an officer had walked a patient through the chaos of a breakdown with calm words, when cuffs might have been easier. Those moments exist, too, she said, scanning the crowd, and they deserve to be just as loud as the moments that shame us. The audience nodded, some eyes wet. The truth wasn't about painting all with one brush, it was about demanding that the strokes that define the canvas are the ones that heal, not harm. Then Rosa Alvarez stepped to the podium. Her hands shook only for a second before she steadied them on the wood. Her voice rang out with the steadiness of church bells. "We are not against the police," she said. "We are against needless pain. We are against silence when it is easier to look away." Applause roared like rain, hammering on roofs. Relentless, cleansing. At last, Derek Lawson rose. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence quieted the hall. "Titles come and go," he said, his tone even, almost gentle. "But no one needs a badge, a rank, or an office to deserve dignity. That belongs to you the moment you are born, and no one has the right to take it." The words didn't just fill the room. They settled into it, brick by brick, foundation by foundation. People straightened. Some wept. Others simply nodded, as though a weight had been named they no longer had to carry alone. A morning without fear. The final scene was quiet. Ordinary. Morning sunlight spread across Maple and 3rd, washing the bodega in warm gold. Derek pushed open the door. The bell gave its thin little ring. The stain was gone from his hoodie, long washed away, but the memory of it clung in the air. Rosa poured his coffee with a smile that held both apology and pride. Jamal leaned on the counter, Scooter at his side, eyes bright with a question too big for 14 years. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked softly. "After everything?" Derek smiled. Not wide, not forced, just steady. "I don't walk these streets to prove I'm strong," he said. "I walk them so the ones who come after me don't have to be afraid at all." He lifted the cup, nodded once, and stepped back into the day hoodie. Coffee, dignity intact. The city moved around him, buses sighing, newspapers thumping, doors opening to morning, and for once, the street felt lighter, not fixed, not perfect, but lighter. Justice isn't about erasing fear. It's about making sure it never rules again. The storm did not end when the auditorium lights went dark. It carried on, echoing through Rivergate like thunder that refuses to roll away. For days, the story spilled across screens and conversations, into churches and corner stores, into classrooms and squad rooms, into living rooms where people who had lived this all their lives finally heard the city repeat their truth out loud. News anchors used words they rarely touched: misconduct, systemic failure, racial bias. But in barbershops, laundromats, and stoops, people didn't need the vocabulary. They just nodded, pointed at the footage on someone's phone, and said, "See? That's what I've been telling you for years." Rivergate was not alone. Other cities had their own footage, their own bruises, their own unfinished stories. But for one rare week, Rivergate had become a mirror so sharp it made denial impossible. Colt Maddox, the Falco Maddox's name, left the roster before the ink dried on the panel's decision. His locker was emptied by noon the next day, his badge surrendered without ceremony. The decertification papers began their long, bureaucratic crawl through the State Post Commission. But the verdict had already been written in a faster, harsher ink, his face on every news broadcast. His voice shouting "Stop resisting" replayed until it was no longer his but a symbol. He tried, at first, to frame himself as the victim of politics. He gave one interview to a sympathetic radio host, calling the panel a witch hunt and Derek a provocateur. The clip circulated briefly, then was drowned out by the video because lies stumble when truth has gone viral. In the end, Cole Maddox became not a name but a cautionary tale, whispered in roll calls across the state. Don't be the next Maddox. He hated the silence more than the noise. Silence meant he was no longer feared, no longer relevant. And silence, unlike noise, cannot be fought. Ryan Keller, the long road. Ryan Keller kept his badge, but not without scars. The suspension held, the retraining began, and with it came long, grueling hours under eyes that no longer trusted him. He walked into rooms where silence met him first, where colleagues shifted their chairs a half-inch away, where his last name became muttered shorthand for cowardice. But there were others, quieter than most, who sought him out in hushed tones. Did he really just drop the badge like that? They'd ask, wide-eyed. Did you really admit it? And Ryan, still wrestling with shame, would nod. Yeah, and I'll be carrying it the rest of my career. Some of them nodded back with respect, others with fear, but all of them understood. Ryan Keller was not just punished, he was branded, and what he did with that brand would decide who he became. He thought often of Derek's words, and the cruiser your body cam has been time-stamped wrong for weeks. Fix it. No one else had known. Somehow Derek had, and Ryan realized, in quiet moments, he hated himself for that Derek had seen him clearer than he had ever seen himself. It became his private vow. No more signatures without truth. Whether it saved him or broke him, that line would be his now. Alina Morales, the watcher Sergeant Alina Morales, went back to her precinct the next morning, the way she always did, uniform pressed, braid tight, eyes steady, but the way others looked at her had changed, some with admiration, some with resentment, many with caution. She didn't revel in it. She didn't shrink from it. She simply did what she had always done, the work. Answer calls, walk beats, file reports, listen more than she spoke. But there was one difference. Where before her insistence on transparency had made her an outlier, now she had wind at her back. Derek's audit was already underway. Cameras were being checked, complaint files reopened, data pulled into the light. Morales wasn't alone anymore, and in a profession where isolation kills reform, that meant everything. On her desk sat the badge case Derek had allowed her to hold that night. She had returned it, of course, but the weight of it lingered, a reminder that her job was not just to follow orders, it was to guard the line between order and abuse. The audit numbers don't lie. The audit began, like all audits do, with boxes of files, with timestamps, with spreadsheets so dense they seemed immune to meaning, but numbers, when read by someone who knows what they're looking for, speak louder than testimony. Stop data showed disproportionate detentions of black men in hoodies, numbers so stark they required no commentary. Complaint resolution times stretched like bad elastic. Some incidents dismissed in days, others buried for years. Bodycam footage missing minutes at crucial points. The report would take months to finalize, but the outline was already undeniable. What happened on Maple and 3rd wasn't an aberration. It was a symptom, and Derek Lawson, in his gray hoodie and coffee-stained collar, had forced the city to look at the disease. Rosa Alvarez, keeper of the story at Rosa's corner store. The line for coffee grew longer that week. Neighbors came not just for bread or batteries, but to stand under the bell that had rung during history. Rosa poured coffee with her surgeon's steadiness, but her eyes softened when people said, "I saw you on the video. Thank you for standing." She shrugged off the praise. "I just told the truth." But Jamal corrected her once, bold as only 14 can be. "No," he said, "you showed the truth. There's a difference." Rosa smiled at that, slipping a banana into his bag the way she always did. Kindness contraband. Some things don't change. Jamal, the archivist Jamal, became a name too, though not the way Cole did. His live stream, shaky at first and steady by courage, had racked up millions of views. Comment sections called him brave, called him a hero, called him a journalist before he was even old enough to drive. But Jamal didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a kid who had been scared and pressed record anyway. His scooter leaned against the store wall the same as always. His homework still needed doing. His mother still asked why his shoes were always scuffed. What changed was the way adults looked at him. Not as a nuisance, not as background, but as someone who had added a page to the city's memory. And in Rivergate, memory is survival. Derek Lawson. The walk continues, and Derek. He walked 3 days after the hearing. The sun rose on Maple and 3rd like nothing had happened. A bus hissed to a stop. A man scratched a lottery ticket against his thigh. The city yawned into its routines, and into those routines stepped Derek Lawson. Gray hoodie zipped, leather shoes that remembered more sidewalks than boardrooms, coffee in hand, banana in bag. People nodded now. Some whispered, "That's him." Others just raised their eyes a second longer than courtesy required. Derek nodded back, never lingering. Respect shouldn't feel like spectacle, but he felt the difference. The weight of being seen, and the lighter counterweight of knowing the truth, had not been erased. Ripples the story refused to stay put. Other cities called, other departments asked for the footage to use in training, advocacy groups cited Rivergate as precedent, law professors assigned a hearing as case study, politicians stumbled over whether to claim it or distance themselves. But on the street, the ripples looked smaller, humbler. An officer approached a teenager with slower steps. A store owner left her camera pointed outward instead of inward. A bus driver nodded at Derek with something heavier than routine courtesy, and Jamal, when asked by classmates why he filmed, simply shrugged. Because if I didn't, they'd say it never happened. The cost of dignity justice is never free. Derek knew that. Cole's supporters muttered online, called him manipulative, said he had staged it. His inbox filled with both gratitude and venom. Some officers avoided his eyes in the hallways at headquarters. Others whispered, "About time," when they passed, but he hadn't chosen this path to win friends or applause. He had chosen it because a boy once cuffed at 16 had made a promise to himself, to build a system where dignity wasn't a coin flip on the street. And now, in middle age, coffee warm in his hand, he was still keeping that promise, one walk at a time. Epilogue: the ordinary future, one morning. Weeks later, Derek walked the same route, past Rosa's bell, past the reflective vest man scratching tickets, past the teenagers arguing about sports drinks. The air smelled of bread and magazine ink and citrus. Jamal appeared at his elbow, phone in hand, grinning. "No, live today?" Derek asked. "Nah," Jamal said. "Sometimes you just walk." Derek smiled, steady and soft. "That's the point." And they walked together, through a city still learning how to breathe truth, through a morning that insisted on being ordinary, because justice is not only in the hearings, the verdicts, the viral videos. Justice is in the mornings that follow, in the quiet courage to walk unafraid, in the stubborn insistence that dignity is not negotiable, and in Rivergate. For once, that stubbornness belonged not just to one man in a hoodie, but to a city that had finally decided to keep its cameras steady and its memories sharp.